Ladies and gentlemen, Phillip Broughton.
Well, thank you very much for that warm welcome and introduction there, Eric. That's brilliant, thank you. I'll touch upon the fisheries issue in a little bit as well. But I'll leave much of the detail to Ray, who's obviously our fisheries spokesman. He's part of the new team that Nigel's put together and he's our expert on the subject. I'll also discuss some of the domestic policy issues that are currently facing Hartlepool as well. So, on the fisheries issue, the common fisheries policy has been disastrous for Britain. It was introduced in 1973 and since then fishing stocks have declined to an alarming rate. Britain had 65% of fishing stocks under international law in North Sea waters. But when the CFP came in, we were allocated 25% by volume or 15% by value under the quota system. The fishing stocks have declined dramatically because we've lost control of our fishing waters. Indeed, in some regions, there's hardly any fish at all left. CFP also has this silly system of discards. So fishermen are having to discard many fish because of the policy of having to stick to these quota numbers. Now, Norway and Iceland don't have CFP, and their fishing stocks are in great shape, they're rising and thriving. They have managed their own fishing waters and stocks, and it's working for them. We in Britain have the fishing stocks, but we can't fish them thanks to the quotas. We need to get back to looking after our own fishing stocks. We have to control our own national waters and we need to get rid of the common fisheries policy. So turning to some of the domestic issues that we're facing currently in Hartlepool today. On the NHS, the Hartlepool Hospital has been downgraded severely. The assurances that the hospital services from the Labour MP Ian Wright, the then Prime Minister Tony Blair, the then Health Secretary John Reid were totally and utterly false. The Labour Party have broken their promises on the Hartlepool Hospital. Labour can no longer be trusted on the NHS. And let's be honest about it, Labour and Tory governments have both done privatisation of the health service. Blair, when he was in power, did foundation hospitals, and now Cameron is offering out services to private tender. So we in UKIP oppose any further moves to push the NHS towards privatisation. We in UKIP fully support the NHS. We support the NHS free at the point of use. We recognise there are problems in the health service. UKIP's solution to these problems is to cut out politically motivated, non-clinically trained middle management. We will return the running of the hospital to the doctors and nurses who understand the day-to-day needs of their patients. We will keep the NHS free for all British citizens. Specifically here in Hartlepool, we want to keep the Hartlepool Hospital at its current site. We want to bring back services that have been removed, including accident and emergency services. We oppose the proposed closures of the GP services at Hartfield's Medical Practice, Fens Medical Practice and Wynyard Road Primary Care Centre as well. We want to scrap the unfair and unnecessary hospital car parking charges. The practice of charging patients, visitors and even hospital staff to park their cars at NHS hospitals is a scandalous rip-off and it must be brought to an end. The NHS hospitals must cease immediately regarding their patients and visitors as a cash cow. It's quite frankly disgraceful when you consider how much general taxation goes towards funding the National Health Service that such an outrageous extra burden is placed upon those who have to use the NHS facilities. I commend the Daily Express in their nationwide campaign to have these punitive charges abolished. And can I urge all of you to go and support the campaign by signing the petition, which will clearly send a message to the government that these hospital parking charges are totally unacceptable. And on Councillor Allowances, we recently had a meeting of Hartlepool Council, and the Labour Hartlepool group on the council voted themselves a future pay rise in their allowances of 1%. Now this, in my opinion, is totally unacceptable. It's wrong in principle, and I totally condemn it. As of yet, we've heard nothing on this matter from the Labour MP for Hartlepool, Ian Wright. Now surely we're entitled to know what he thinks of the actions of his Labour councillors. My position, and the UKIP position on this, is at a time when responsible, hard-working families are struggling to make ends meet, it is morally indefensible for councillors to be milking taxpayers' cash. After all, isn't it the Labour Party that is constantly going on about the cost of living crisis? Should they not be setting an example and showing some restraint? On overdevelopment, we in UKIP want to give planning power back to you, the people. It was welcome news that Tunstall Farm and Quarry Farm planning applications were deferred at the recent planning committee meeting. However, I suspect this is unfortunately just a minor delay in the process. I have previously stated in the newspapers that I am sceptical about the need for such a massive increase in housing in Hartlepool. Whatever building does go on should not be at the expense of our beautiful greenbelt. In Hartlepool currently, there are over 1,000 properties up for sale, with planning applications pending for a further 7,000. This equation proves my point, that there is no demand for more housing in Hartlepool at all. I served on Stockton Borough Council's planning committee when I was a councillor, and I'd like to tell you about a fundamental flaw in the present planning system. I've seen the applications submitted for large housing developments where there was almost universal disapproval. Councillors would oppose it, the people were against it, the residents were against it, with everyone warning of the faults and the dangers of the application. Yet despite this, such opposition, these collective objections were dismissed unless it was proved there was a material planning consideration, a wholly unsatisfactory and unhealthy situation. As a councillor, you felt as if you were letting your constituents down by not carrying out their wishes. And when constituents feel as if they were being totally and utterly ignored, both valid reactions. When the people feel detached from the planning process, then that process itself needs to be re-evaluated. I believe that the planning laws need to change to reflect the views of the people that they affect. I and my party, UKIP, think that planning applications for large-scale housing developments, wind turbine installations, should be made subject to a binding local referendum. This would truly put the power back in the hands of the people. It is the people who are affected by these major changes to their locality, and it is only right that they should have the final say. It would in effect introduce real democracy into the system, as developers and councils would truly have to engage with the electorate, no bad thing in my opinion. And on unemployment, which is a particularly problem in the North East but also here in Hartlepool, the North East has the highest unemployment rate in the country at 9.6%. That's despite many Labour MPs in the region not doing a very good job. As a matter of fact, we could make the case for them being unemployed. Hopefully there'll be a few of them soon. Hartlepool's unemployment is at 5%. Now this is higher than the North East average of 3.5% and more than twice the national rate of 2.4%. Unemployment has been a stubbornly high for a long time here in Hartlepool. So what's our solution to the unemployment problem? Well, we understand in this party that we've got to help businesses, because it's ultimately businesses that create jobs and help our economy grow. 60% of people who work in the private sector are employed by a small or medium-sized business. So we must cut tax and regulation to help businesses create jobs and cut unemployment. We must vigorously oppose Ed Miliband's planned national insurance tax rise, because this is pure and simple a tax on jobs. And we must also give people the skills to get into work. And yes, we should be pushing for more apprenticeships. The single biggest issue that's raised with me on the doorstep when I go around campaigning is immigration. Now the Labour Party don't want to talk about immigration. They spent 13 years in government shouting down anyone who spoke about it. If you talked about immigration, you were racist. Well, let me say this. It is not racist to talk about immigration. It is a serious issue and it should be discussed. Our approach in UKIP is very, very straightforward. We want controlled and limited immigration. We would end uncontrolled, open-door immigration. We'd introduce a strict, points-based visa system like Australia has, very successfully. Immigration has to be controlled to relieve pressure on health, education, housing and welfare services. We'd leave the EU to truly regain control of our borders. We would trade, be friends, cooperate with the EU, but we'd not be run by it politically. We must have the ability to control the quantity and the quality of people who come in to Britain. An immigration system that treats everyone the same, a non-racist immigration policy. So here in Hartlepool in May, as Eric was saying earlier on, we achieved fantastic results. We won the local elections and we won the European elections. We now have to build on these fantastic results. The general election, I believe, is very quickly going to develop into a two-horse race, with me for UKIP against Ian Wright for Labour here in Hartlepool. On the issues, whether it be councillor allowances, immigration, Hartlepool Hospital, unemployment or overdevelopment, we are leading on these points and our opponents are silent. And why are they silent? Because their only record is that of failure, and because they've got nothing to say about the future of Hartlepool. The issue for the other parties is this. The Tories know they can't win Hartlepool, and Labour think they can't lose it. Only UKIP can beat Labour in Hartlepool, as the recent elections show. The people are crying out for a real alternative to Labour, and we are that alternative. It's time for real change in Hartlepool and real change in British politics. Only UKIP can provide the change we so desperately need. And I believe next year in the general election, we can create an amazing result here in Hartlepool, and we can win this seat. So with your help, and we'll need it, let's get out there and win it. Thank you.